Okay, so if we have to use multiple CLAUDE.md files in order for us to operate our Shopify store more effectively, I think the best way is to think of it not from perspective of where we want to perform all kinds of operations at once. If we just think of it operating only very specific parts of the store. For instance, if I were to just use it for managing product catalog, if we have a store of say 1,000 products and we want to start creating descriptions and titles and Metafields for all those 1,000 products, how do we ensure that our Claude setup is in a way that it manages the brand voice effectively? It is not putting in any keywords that we really don't want in the title or description and so on. So what we'll try to figure out is there a way for us to use multiple layers of instructions for Claude that we can persist across operating the Shopify store for all sorts of instructions. But the most important thing is that we are going to assume that we are not going to use all of these skills. We are only going to use 2 skills, and we'll go over that. So what I've done is there's a folder structure that we have set up. So when we run Claude, we'll basically run Claude on this folder structure. There is a default CLAUDE.md file. What this default CLAUDE.md file is doing is it's basically defining what the brand is, what my role as a operator is, and some of the additional operations, some of the additional context related to what other types of files exist. For example, context you should always load. There is a brand voice CLAUDE.md, there's a Metafield dictionary, meta object dictionary if I want to make updates to any meta objects, and there are some policies related to any customer facing content. When I say customer facing content, like if there's a brand that's selling products that are regulated in a certain environment. So we want to make sure that those policies are always run separately on the generated content. So if we have these multiple layers of skills or MD files, it will help Claude to go over it step by step. Now, there are some commands that you could technically create. So I have these 5 where there's a daily command, daily audit. I can just run a daily, type in daily audit, and the instructions that are there will follow in whatever we want to do from daily audit. Think of daily audit literally just like a prompt that if you were doing it as a one shot, you're just going in, typing in that prompt. Instead of writing the whole prompt, you are sort of just saying this. One thing that we have to keep in mind here is that every time a prompt runs, there are tokens being utilized. And when we are saying that there is a brand voice, there is a Metafield dictionary. So basically, it's essentially just the prompt is getting bigger and bigger as we are adding more context. So we want to be using techniques where we can sort of cache the prompt. We'll not cover that in this session, but it is something to be aware of. How to work when I ask for data. So this is again a set of instructions that me is in when I ask for data, use Shopify admin to pull it. When I ask for change, default to dry run, do not show me what would change before it changes. So essentially it's saying that do not make any changes. But when output quality matters, like description, alt text, etc., use the brand voice reference. Again, reinforcing that brand voice is important. And ask me clarifying question before executing anything that affects more than 10 items. This is just an example. You could have this as 50, 100, or 1. It's a good practice to not just to write to a store for all products at once. Now, this is the default baseline CLAUDE.md file. There's a README file here that you can just go over how the toolkit works. You can just go over that. It would make sense. Some of these things are going to be useful. We actually, you know what? We can just go over this quickly as well. It'll take a few minutes. So this is when you set it up, this is basically just an instructions not for Claude, but more for you. Like, how do you set this up? So this is ideally designed for non-developer operators who are running a larger store. It's not necessarily a 10K plus store. Like even if you have less SKUs, it should still, the setup should still work. But in some cases, it might be an overkill to have a much more elaborate setup than you might just be able to work with a single MD file. Install order. Fork or copy the structure into your ops repo. Your ops repo is essentially where you're running from Claude code from, wherever you start asking queries from Claude. Replace all brand placeholders and CLAUDE.md file and others. So every CLAUDE.md file that you look at will have this brand just a placeholder. So make sure you replace this with the name of your brand. Just make sure to do that across all files. Then you need to install Shopify AI Toolkit if you have not done this already. It's not tricky. There's just a few commands that you need to run within Claude Code. Once you run this, it should install automatically. Set up your Shopify credential. Once you set these up, once you run these commands, it will ask you to authenticate via browser. So this shouldn't be needed in most cases if you are authenticated via this. But if you are authenticating via code, that's when you want to add your Shopify credentials from your store. You need to create an app and you need to do that from your custom app. But in all likelihood, you'll likely skip this step. Make hooks executable. So I am not going to cover this for now. It's slightly more complex for this session. Open the alert, start with daily audit to verify the read path works. So this is basically just like if once your setup is done, you want to make sure that whether your setup is working or not. So every morning you start, basically, you just go and type in daily audit. So they'll just tell you that whether or not the setup is working. Another way is you could just ask whether my Shopify store is connected or not, and that will help as well. So going over the directory structure, we have at the root, when I say root, this is my folder. This is a folder where you have everything. This is the root folder, Shopify setup. In the root, you have three files, and there's a .md file, there's a readme file, which we are reading right now, and there's an mcp.json. Ignore this for now. This is for another day. Then you have Claude rules. If I go here, so in the .claude folder, you will notice there are 4 folders. We'll just go over it one by one. So there are rule sets, there are hooks, there are commands, and there are agents. Now, so rules are essentially the rules that you want to be followed before every operation is run. So let's say if we talk about store context.md, let's just open and see what we can do is like we can go over each rule quickly. So there are certain types of rules and there are some that needs to be followed before certain kind of operations. So if we go and let's say admin read patterns, when I say admin read patterns, it is sort of defining the input and output for certain kind of operations. So if when using the admin skill, follow these patterns. When I ask for data, if I am asking that I want customers with average order value less than 500 over last 1 year, it shouldn't just start dumping randomly. There has to be some basis for that. And that basis is that it should, the smallest useful result set, start with limit 20, scale as I want. So what this it sort of limits the token usage. It sort of stays on context. So even in that very moment, I'm not very aware of, okay, I know I want like top 20 or top 30, but I'm just not mentioning it. So it's sort of, I've set these rules up that this is what we want. Second, sorted by most recent, unless I say otherwise, which makes sense. Key fields only title. So there might be 20 fields that it could respond with, but we are sort of just ensuring that we only want these. It might be different for different types of brands. Like in certain cases, you might want more, in certain cases, you might want less. In certain cases, you might want just top 5. It depends. It depends on your use case. But in case you are able to generalize it, it's better if you set those things in these rules. Never do this. Don't dump full product JSON. Do not paging it through entire catalog. Again, these are the sort of operations which will end up taking a lot of tokens that they don't quite make a lot of sense. Don't include system fields, which I would like to believe it would not, but there's no harm just over communicating here that don't do this and don't return raw responses. It's sort of, again, I'd like to believe Claude is smart enough to not do that. Do this instead. Pull 20, let the response with an answer. If I ask how many, just give me the number. If I ask for top X by Y, just show me the list sorted by Y, and so on. So I think like this, the rule set is more going to be tailored to how I am as a person. Like brand voice, when you're writing a brand voice, you're talking about the brand, but rule set is more like how I operate at a person level. So someone who's in merchandising team will have a very different sort of rule set than someone who's in, say, a data intelligence team or who's customer relationship team. So this is a very personal level file that should be different for every useful query shortcuts. When I say low stock products with inventory, which is less than 10, slow movers, new this month. Again, these are like shortcuts that I've set and I've just told Claude by default, follow these. Formatting output, default to markdown tables for list, for large results, summarize first, blah, blah, blah. So this, we're just saying like, if there were like 1,000 results possible, don't dump it to me unless I ask for it. I may just assume certain things. Like if I am running a query, I might think that might then like 10, 15, it'll take a couple of seconds for that response. But a lot of times this happens on Claude, right? Like when you're working on Claude, you'd ask something, it would dump a whole long list of things, but you're not ready for it. So you just wanted like a short one-liner, and then only when it says that there are 847 items you may matching, do you want them? So you can sort of set this up as a rule. So this is everything about how I want retrieval to happen. So similarly, there are writes, and we can just start going. Sorry? Yeah. So writes are dangerous zones, and that's how we start. These patterns exist to keep them safe. Always before a write. So these we are defining some definite rules. Confirm the scope with me. Show me the difference. Run the write on one item first. Show me the result. Only then run on the full scope. Always when after the write is done, log to. So this is probably one of the most critical pieces which we don't do this at all right now. So is there a way for us to keep a log of whatever Claude is doing on Shopify store? So I think this is a super nice way to be aware of what is being done. So that, because like if you tell update description of 10 products and it did, like how do you know if it worked or not? Like it'll show you in that Claude session that, hey, I did this, like these are the 10 products that were updated, but you will in all likelihood just lose that Claude session. We are not optimizing on using Claude in a way that every session is sort of saved, and it's hard to find things. So if we can write it in a persistent storage somehow, which this can do, we can sort of create a folder, store data, and write log is literally just a dump of whatever is being done. I think like what that brings us to is, should this be a part of a larger version control system like Git across the org, which I feel yes, it definitely should be. The only problem is like operators don't use Git in day-to-day basis. Like how would they push their updates? So I think there has to be a more structured way, and maybe like operators can adopt to start using it, and that whenever they are making changes, they just push their respective Claude files, which is a write log also. But yeah, like this definitely deserves a lot of love and care. This can be one of those things which can be shared across the company and act like one of those running log of things across the org. Yeah, I mean, like when I was going over this, I think like we spoke earlier about having this is ideal for 10,000 products, but maybe not. Maybe like even a store with 20 products, if they're using Claude on day-to-day basis, they could even use that. Report what changed, count of items, count of success, count of errors. I think like this is if any item failed, list the ID. So this, we are just mentioning whatever the outcome of a write is, tell that back to us. And also write it to this. So basically what can be super helpful is that if we come up with like a standardized structure that when whatever write is done, whether or not it was done, or whether, let's say if there was a write attempted, even that gets logged. So that's also sort of a good way of keeping track of the things that we wanted to do, but we are not able to for whatever reason. Maybe we didn't have permission, maybe it was too long of a text to go in that field. There could be multiple reasons. Okay. So next is mutation patterns, product update only include. Yeah. So it's critical to be aware of whenever we are doing any writes, we don't end up writing into fields that we did not intend. So for example, if we are thinking of, if we want to if we want to make writes on product title, so we shouldn't write in description instead. So we want to enforce those sort of rules. Only include fields that are actually changing, never wholesale replace description HTML diff, description HTML if the change is first. For tags, always fetch current tags first. So we don't want to override certain things. Like if we are, let's say, writing a new tag. So if we are wanting to add a new tag called bestseller, so there might be 10 tags already on the product. So we don't want to override that with remove all of those and just add bestseller, because technically the Claude would have those permissions. So we want to ensure like we're mentioning those rules specifically. Same thing for variants. We have variant specific rules. This is probably again one of those tricky things that will need, so for every store will need to keep a very dedicated dictionary for the Metafields that they're using. If they're using standard Shopify set, I think like that's probably the best case scenario. But if they're not, they need to ensure that Claude is aware about the Metafields that they're using. And one way to do that is to keep a list of Metafields in a separate file. So in store data here, there is a Metafield dictionary. If I go to Metafield dictionary, you'll notice every Metafield that a store uses, they can sort of explain all of this here. And in our write patterns, we are making sure that the Metafield dictionary is being referenced whenever we are creating a new Metafield. So we want to make sure that we're not adding to a wrong Metafield. If there was, let's say, if we run an audit and we figure out that out of 500 products that we have on the store, 400 don't have ingredients set up. So we ask Claude to set up ingredients for those 400, but it needs to know which is the field to write to. So that's why it's important. If I say that write in ingredients for those 400 products, it needs to make sure that it fills in those 400, not the rest. Error handling if imitation file stop. I think like this is again important. Like if the write operation starts and it's just not able to perform for whatever reason, so it should just stop and ask me how to proceed. Rate limits, the Shopify admin skills handles throttling automatically if you hit rate limits anyway, back of 30 seconds. Yeah, okay. So this is just letting the agent know, letting Claude know that this will happen. Do not get worried about this. So if we go back to our Claude file and we just start looking at this again, we saw a few context files here. We just went through the read and write patterns rules. There are some approval gates. So approval gates are essentially, again, the guardrails that we are sort of putting in place to make sure that we don't end up running any commands which will break how we operate things on our store. So if I go back to the reason I was trying to go back to this was because I wanted to make sure that the way we are reading this file is, I check this, it says treat rights with care, see rules and approval gates. So we were going through rights. We want to make sure that whenever rights are happening, they are going through approval gates. Now, if we go through approval gates quickly, approval gates for right operations are that we are not, there is no, these are the things that do not need any approval. For example, reads, pulling data, you can do whatever you want. Dry runs that show what would change. Generating copy description for, again, this is just for me. These are reads and reading Metafields and meta objects, which makes sense. So all of this that we are doing, there is nothing that is actually modifying the store. So we can safely do these without having any approval gates. Then there are single item confirmations, updating a single Metafield, updating a single product description, adding all text, updating single meta object entry. You can add more things if you feel that there is more need to add more here. But these are the things that would, even if there is just a single confirm and you say yes, go ahead, you're good to move forward. These are the ones, like then there is, you can break it down. So essentially what we have done is we've broken down approval gates into multiple categories. One, they were just reads. Second, they were writes, limited writes. Third, there are writes which will require a larger iteration for it to do. So, and that's what this is. Scope plus iron required. It should show. So if it is writing for anything which is less than 10 items, it should show me the difference. It should run it. It should show me the difference. And only when I say go ahead, it should go ahead and do it. So it basically did all of it, but it just didn't write it. So it did a dry run of that, and it showed me how it would work for 10. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting, where there are more products. Now, this, we want to make sure that for any longer list, we want to make sure that it asks us every single time. Any price changes, any right affecting 11 plus items. Price changes at any scope. This is not saying that this is for 11 plus items. Like if you see any command anywhere which is changing the price, just stop. This is important. We put it right here. And the reason is that we might be doing a different operation. We might be doing something else, which might be internally invoking a price update. So when it sees a price update, it will see that there is a guardrail and it will stop at that approval gate and it'll come back to us. So it's important to just be aware of this. Any operation that handles a product, that on the handles of products, again, one of those things which is super critical for SEO. Like you cannot just change the URL. So it needs to stop if that is happening. Any operation that deletes anything is pretty obvious. Any operation on Metafield definitions, not the values. If it is creating a new Metafield, it needs to ask us. If it is deleting a Metafield, it needs to ask us. Any bulk operation described with words, like all, every, or everything, it sort of makes sense. So I think like this is probably, the approval gates are going to be one of those very critical things that will define how we operate on day-to-day basis between Shopify and Claude. This, along with this, working with the log files, and so right, making any write update, plus the approval gate sort of sets a good benchmark of what a good Claude setup looks like. Next is for bulk operations. We are explicitly telling it before executing any bulk operation, output this exact structure. So this is sort of we are starting to wanting to see a summary of what they are going to do as a bulk thing. Now, there are some assumptions that we can take here, that we can make here, that because we have the approval gates in place, even if a bulk operation will happen, we should be sort of safe. So because we are saying that, okay, it is, if there is a price change happening, it will stop. So this operation will likely not change the price, because if it does, it will stop us. And so on. Like any of the other restricted items are invoked, it will just stop. Do not execute until I say yes. I think like I keep going back to the CLAUDE.md file, because this is the first thing that gets invoked when we run any command. So we have clearly mentioned treat writes with care, see rules for this. If we have the rule file here, but we don't have this line here, then it is useless, because then we are not really telling it that use that file. So it's important that we mention this in our CLAUDE.md file. We've done read, write, approval gates, taxonomy, and schemas. Okay. So for Metafields, we did look at the Metafield taxonomy, which is pretty much done. Meta object schemas. So similar to how we have Metafields, we can define operations related to meta objects as well. So because meta objects are a sort of a complex structure of metafields tied together, so we have defined a definition here, which sort of explains all of that. I think one very basic thing we just missed was the store context. These actually, the brand voice. So we have mentioned that context you should always load. This is the first thing that gets loaded, which is the brand voice. So there's a folder here which says brand voice. It has a file called brand voice, and the brand in the brand voice, this right now the way I have it is really simple and straightforward, but technically think of it like your long list of brand guidelines that you have, and just put everything. What that does is it just trains Claude, it teaches Claude to never add anything in title, description, or any content. This, what you mentioned here, and also follow the specific guidelines that you have. I think one thing that I just missed earlier, I was talking about the Metafield and meta objects. So there are two things. One is the Metafield dictionary, and the other is the Metafield taxonomy. So taxonomy is a longer list of more structural things, as the dictionary is actual values. So there's this fundamental difference that we just need to be aware of. And other than this, there are policies when we are leading when we are loading our initial context, so what we've loaded is the brand voice, what we've loaded is the dictionary for Metafields and meta objects, and what we are loading are these policies. Policies are we for every store you have policies like return pay, return policy, terms and conditions, refund policy, and so on. So you're sort of defining all of that with their respective URLs here. What this does is like this could be used sometimes just to make like if there's a ticket that you're dealing with a customer and you want Claude to create a message for you, so it can just create that with that URL because it'll have all of that context here. I think that's pretty much it. We have there's a right reviewer which always gets loaded before everything else. Okay, so we can actually go over the commands here. So we briefly spoke about this earlier, where we have like every time you start using your Claude with Shopify, you're basically starting your session with certain questions that you want. So every day I can actually do this audit. And when I ask to do a daily audit, it basically runs this whole thing. And you're not typing it every day. You're just saying daily audit and it gives you this, which is pretty cool. Saves you a lot of time. Similarly, you can have a command like this where it's basically just if your products are being updated on a daily or weekly basis, a lot of times you might end up not putting in all information on the product. So maybe you missed some metafield, maybe you added title description, but the SEO title was not as optimized. Maybe you did not end up adding the metafields. So this specific command is actually that. So find product with a missing specific metafield and fill it using the brand voice plus context. So you're sort of using all of that. And then it's just a detailed prompt, which is, if you read it, you will notice that the prompt itself has these things built in. So you're not on daily basis like putting in everything together. Hey, write like this, write like that. It knows it because you've sort of created these commands. And you can do similar thing for meta objects. You can define what sort of data do you want to see every day, and you can create that in a like as a prompt, and you can just save it and save that as a command, and then it can like every day, every morning, you can just go and click on type in full report. It'll get you all content that you want to see. It's pretty much like if you're going to your Shopify dashboard every day, you're going to analytics, you're filtering on certain things, but you want to do those things from Claude. It has its own models, plus you're giving it data, so it can connect dots in a much nicer way. There's a safe bulk update, not delete, sorry. So again, prompt that is there that you can save as a command and it will help. What you could do is like you could create, these are just 4 or 5 examples. You could create like 20 of these. Your team could use like different teams could use different types of commands and then get information and work accordingly. Now there are some more things here, like there are hooks like post, right? What do I want to, which is, we can skip this part for now. We can probably cover that separately, but it talks about like how do we want to manage our logs and so on. I think that's it for going over like how the structure is. What we can do is we can just start Claude from a session where this is being invoked and just run some commands to see how that works.